You're listening to Cover Your Assets, a podcast that discusses the timely and significant legal issues faced by employers. Kathleen Jennings is an attorney who has over 30 years of experience in advising employers as to their legal responsibilities and has written extensively about employment law in her popular Cover Your Assets blog. If your business has employees, you cannot afford not to have your assets covered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cover Your Assets podcast. And before we begin, we just want to start with thanking everyone for tuning in and help us grow the podcast, if you would, please. And maybe write a nice review or share an episode. And we just received some interesting news via email, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. But Kathleen, it looks like we are one of the top 5 podcasts in Morocco. How did that happen?
I think that's fantastic news, Tom. I think that we can now say that we are an international success.
Yeah, Morocco. I don't know who's listening in Morocco, but if you are, thank you, and we would be happy. You know, I've told my sister that one of my ultimate goals with this podcast is to take it on the road. And so if there is a Moroccan promoter out there, please contact us.
Well, Tom, I think the road to Morocco has already been done.
Oh, is that a Bing Crosby, Bob Hope thing?
I think
or was
so.
that a Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis?
Yeah. Probably most of our listeners will have no clue what that's all about. But for our listeners of a certain age, they'll appreciate that reference.
That's right. And speaking of listeners of a certain age, and we have a guest today, and someone who's a fellow New Yorker. And now we are recording this in 2 locations, one in New York and one in Georgia. And down in Georgia, we have a fellow New Yorker to discuss our topic today. Kathleen, I'm going to pass this over to you, and please give us an introduction to our special guest today.
Well, first of all, Tom, you didn't introduce me as the resident expert. So I am your resident expert, Kathleen Jennings. I'm an attorney, and today I happen to be in my law office in Atlanta, Georgia. And with me is a very special guest, Louise Hughes, who is our firm's administrator and woman of many talents. And she has agreed to join us for the podcast today to talk about our topic, which, Tom, is what?
The topic today is employee communication. And I will say that I didn't communicate to our listeners that you were indeed our resident expert slash attorney. But you're mentioned in the intro, so I don't know how much more introduction you need.
Well, I always like the introduction, but Louise, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and welcome to our podcast.
Well, thank you. I am Louise Hughes. I've lived in Atlanta since I moved here from New York State, and that is upstate New York as opposed to New York City. Since 1977, done a lot of things, but right now I'm helping these folks manage their law firm. So I do everything that isn't law.
And when she says everything, she means everything. Because attorneys need a lot of hand-holding. I don't know that people are aware of that, but not all attorneys are great business people. And so this is a business. And luckily we have Louise here to help us run the business like a business.
Yeah. And it's important, regardless of what business you're in, to be able to communicate effectively with your employees. And in terms of it becoming a legal issue, I'm sure that we can all think of examples where a potential issue related to anything from discrimination to a person feeling that they've been disrespected could potentially turn into a lawsuit. So this is an important topic, not just for attorneys, but for all HR people. So Louise, I want to start out with, first of all, when you have something that needs to be communicated to the entire workforce, what do you find is the most effective way to get the message to everyone?
Well, I go back to the 3 basics of communication, which are tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And I do that through email and in person, early and often.
And, I'm glad that you mentioned in email and in person, because I know we talked a little bit about this before the show and the importance of it, that, in as much as we like to think that email communication is the be all end all. And I know that there's different camps. Some people say, oh, everything's got to be on paper. And there's other people like, oh, everything's got to be on email or everything's got to be in person. But I think you'll agree that you really have to make sure that everybody, that you take into consideration everybody's comfort level with technology, and maybe, the best way to communicate with people on an individual basis, rather than assuming that everybody communicates the same way that you do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think there are probably as many different communication styles as there are people in the world. And some people understand things very directly when you put it succinctly. And some people sometimes need you to come at things sideways. And that puts a burden on anybody that is trying to work with a very, and I'll say this about attorneys, a really actually very creative set of people, because they are looking to solve problems for their clients. And it takes a lot more creativity than you would think it might.
Well, and I would imagine too, just from a monetary standpoint, you're looking at, if a message doesn't get to the right person or it doesn't get to the workplace, you could lose a client's business and really cause some problems on their end as well.
Oh, absolutely. And that has happened. I'm sure that there are many, many cases that everyone can always think about, whether it's very plain to see in sales, communication style from a salesperson. And believe me, attorneys are also salespeople, because they have to sell their time to their client and sell their expertise to their clients. And if they don't recognize the communication style that their client prefers, they can lose a client very easily.
And Kathleen, I know that we've brought this up. In fact, it was our inaugural episode, our very first one. We talked about OSHA inspection. So let's talk about maybe in some cases that you deal with, if you're working with someone that has an upcoming OSHA inspection, or they know an inspector is on site. I mean, I would assume you would want to let your client communicate to their staff that there's going to be an OSHA inspection, and at least, watch what you're doing during that period of time.
Well, and this kind of touches on the issue from the lawyer's perspective of what do we want to have in writing and what don't we want to have in writing. So in the case of an upcoming OSHA inspection, what I would like to see in writing is something that shows that the employer cares about safety and is reinforcing the training that's already been done. I don't want something in writing that says, hey, you better clean up your area for the first time in 50 years because we're going to have an OSHA inspector here. So from the attorney's perspective, we like to see things in writing that help us, and we don't like to see things in writing that hurt us. So when you're sending an email, think about, how is this going to look in front of a jury of people who know nothing about you and nothing about your business?
And to you, Louise, with Kathleen bringing up an excellent point, everything is documented. If you put it in the form of an email, or if it's paper, or I guess to a certain extent, you never know if something's recorded. So even verbal communication can be recorded as well. What are some of the things that you take into consideration in terms of like tone and way that you communicate things to the workforce that, I guess, to put it in simpler terms, how do you make sure that the words that you use are not misconstrued?
I try not to say, really? And I mean that truly. There are times when I have been in a meeting, and I have communicated at the meeting through my words that things were going to be done a certain way. And an example is, we have a small staff, and in September, we have 3 of our top people who will be out on vacation in some overlapping time space for that. And so one of the things that we talked about in a staff meeting and told everybody about was, oh, please be sure you do not schedule doctor's appointments, or we can't, avoid anything that is unforeseen. But if you can avoid doctor's appointments or dental appointments or anything that cross this time frame that would cause you to not be in the office when we have the 3 highest powered staff people out who also are working with the firm. Anyway, what I had the next day was somebody say, well, I have to take such and such a day off because, that's when I can get my next doctor's appointment. And it was like, what did we talk about yesterday? I mean, and it was really hard for me to not say, really?
But that's very important, though. I mean, it really, those one word responses can get you into a lot of trouble. I mean, said that's a form of communication. And I think, I don't know if you were aware, I assume you were aware you were saying, but even the verbiage that you used in terms of, saying if you can avoid it, as opposed to making things sound so rigid. And it's funny that employee obviously didn't get the message, because you did say that. You're like, look, if you got to make an appointment, make the appointment. We're not telling you not to seek medical attention, or if you had a doctor's appointment already scheduled, but don't just schedule one on this day because this is an important day for you to be here.
Right.
Yeah, there's some emails that, and this is from I guess just in general, there are some people that I consider so annoying that I have a 24-hour rule that I will not respond to an email for 24 hours, because if I respond right away, I am likely to say something that is less than professional. So sometimes if somebody sends you an email that is obnoxious or annoying or even inappropriate, it's not a good idea to respond in kind. You really have to rise above that kind of thing. And that goes for everybody, because as our mother used to tell us, 2 wrongs don't make a right.
I don't remember our mother telling us that. Did she really tell us that?
She told us that all the time.
I guess I was just doing so many things wrong that she just figured 300 wrongs. Yes.
You don't need to do anything more wrong. A hole in the head. That didn't even work.
Oh, goodness. So, Louise, do you have any stories that come to mind of maybe an email or a message or something that needed to get out that really just wound up going wrong, maybe through nobody's fault of their own, but you look back in retrospective and said, man, I'm never going to do that again?
Well, fortunately, I don't have any from here, but I do have a phishing email story where here in our law firm, we have a couple of perhaps a little bit older attorneys, and I have 2 attorneys who do not use a computer, which means they have a legal assistant for that. And so all of their emails come through their legal assistant. And so one of the things that happens in the world today is people get all kinds of emails purporting to be from people they do not know. I'm on the board of an association of legal administrators, and I receive an email. I've been the treasurer for a couple of years. And every year, as the officers changed, as the president changed and the secretary changed and the vice president changed, I would get an email or 2 or 3 from the person who was currently the president saying, hey, Louise, can you pay this bill via Venmo? I'm out of the office and I can't do it right now, and I need you to do it. And then, they're very nicely saying, this is Amy or this is Anne. And so the first thing I do is I pick up the phone and I call them and I say, are you asking me to Venmo money out of the association to you or to somebody else? And they're like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, good, it was spam. But in the office here, we received an email from our major partner. We all received this email, and it said, I'm running late, and could you stop by somewhere and pick up some iTunes gift cards in a specific denomination? I need 5 of them. And that came from our senior partner. Now, our senior partner is one of those people who does not use a computer. As a matter of fact, he usually hands his phone to somebody when he says, can you make this thing look up where I can find a barber? So I came out of my office and I said, did anybody else get this email? And people were like, oh, yes, we got it. We got it. I said, okay, this is phishing. I mean, when was the last time that this partner came to you via email when he was already in the office? And they were like, well, he doesn't. He comes around and talks to us. And it's like, yeah. But I did have one attorney who had gotten up from their desk and run over to Target. And then actually we called him and he said, well, good. I was just about to call and say that I can't find that denomination of iTunes gift cards. And it's like, good, because it's not real. Since then, we've had a change of IT policies, and we now do phishing tests every month, and I get a report. But that's an interesting thing that happens in today's world, where email people just expect it came through the email and they assume that it came from the person that they received it from.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge issue. I mean, that could cost firm a lot of money if they bite into some. I mean, luckily this one only happened to be iTunes cards, but I wonder. Well, I guess people don't realize too that it's, if you are really determined to phish, that they'll figure out a way to take an email address, a legitimate email address, and send out an email. So, I mean, how did you recognize, other than the fact that you knew the individual? I mean, other than that, did the email look like it was authentic?
It looked like a very casual email, but it was coming from a person who doesn't know casual email.
Yeah, that's crazy. Now, just out of curiosity, I don't know how you do it. I know I've worked a lot of different places, and they have different ways of handling things, especially when it comes to memos, whether it's electronic or in paper or everything. And some people say, oh, reply to this email just to prove that you got it. Most programs will show whether you've opened an email or not. And some people use sign-in sheets and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything that you do to ensure that you have some record that says this message was sent out and everybody received it?
In email today, you can do that. You can actually put settings on the email. I don't depend on just email to communicate things that have to be communicated around the firm. So I have not made use of those tools on the email, mainly because it would just increase the amount of email that came into my inbox. So one of the things we as a firm use is we use an electronic document management system, and all client communications, email, and any notes that typically attorneys take when they make phone calls are stored in that electronic document management system. And that is really how, and of course, especially when an attorney is calling a client, they are memorialized in a billing entry. So those are those.
Of course, we would not want attorneys not to be able to bill for every phone call. I agree with that.
Well, I mean, I think that people do have to remember that attorneys, what they're selling is their time.
True. No, I agree.
And,
I'm only picking on my sister, Louise. It just, it's that old stereotype. I used to read a lot of John Grisham novels, and that was always the big thing was that the billable hours, But I digress.
Actually, that is a big thing for us, and it still is. So that's how we make our money.
It is how they make their money.
It is how we make our money.
And I have specific and strong feelings and opinions. The attorneys have heard my opinions.
But Thom, I think going to the phishing and the spam, one of the issues that also comes up where you have to make your employees aware of those types of fake emails is the cases where you can get an email that will hold your system hostage and ask for a ransom in Bitcoin usually, which right now isn't worth a whole heck of a lot. But it can absolutely shut down your business if you don't have access to your servers because of this ransom demand. So that's another reason when we're talking about covering your assets, you want your employees to make sure that they're not clicking on strange attachments or replying to strange emails, because that can have a really huge adverse effect on your business.
And I would imagine that from a labor and employment law perspective, that if a hacker was able to gain entry into your system, they would thus be able to find private information. And that's where you could be looking at a legal issue in terms of, if you've stored employee social security numbers, medical information, any of that stuff. I mean, that could expose you to a heck of a lawsuit, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it could. Yeah. If you don't protect that kind of private information in a way that would keep those kinds of hackers out, if you don't take any precautions, for example, you really are opening yourself up to possible legal action if something happens and the information is disclosed. And just for us, from a legal perspective, we have to make sure we protect the attorney-client privilege information as well. So, and if you have a business with competitors, you certainly don't want your competitors hacking into your system and getting trade secrets or other information that may be used against you in a competitive environment. So there's a lot of reasons why you want your employees to be savvy about emails that they open and don't open, or know the procedure for reporting these types of emails to the correct person so that you can protect the company from any kind of attack or infiltration.
And Louise, you mentioned something, you're doing a test like every month that the firm is doing like a spam test. What does that involve? I mean, that sounds interesting.
Well, it's something that a lot of IT support or IT management companies can offer to a company like ours or any company. And what they do is they actually create emails that are phishing types of emails, and they count the clicks. They count how many people opened it. They count if anybody clicked on the thing that they were being asked to click on. And they report it back to me. Our system also, if people fail it 3 months in a row, it automatically signs them up for a class. And they have to spend about 30 minutes taking the class. And we have had repeat offenders early on, but are happy to report that people are becoming a little bit more cautious. The other thing that happens, of course, is when that happens in a month and it doesn't happen the same time, people call me up and they say, I got this email and it's from IT services at our email address. And it's like, okay, great. We don't have an IT services email. So yes, that is spam.
Well, that's
And
good.
I am happy to report that I have not been sent to spam school. So apparently I have passed the spam tests, and I'm very happy about that.
And on an unrelated note, I happen to be a fan of the actual spam meat, but I'm not allowed to have it in the house because my wife just absolutely abhors it. So,
because it's disgusting.
Well, to each his own. But I think going back to that practice, it's almost like, my day gig is as a teacher. I mean, we do fire drills. We do fire drills because you never know when there's going to be a fire, and it's a heck of a lot easier to make sure that the kids and the staff and everybody's attuned to heading out when there's a fire drill. So when a real fire happens, everybody knows what to do. Obviously, the same thing with the spam. And we can't underscore enough that there's so many issues that you can run into if you're not just doing something like that. So if there's services out there, I'm not going to recommend any in particular, unless they want to be our sponsor. Maybe we should talk to them, Kathleen. And
that's a great idea.
It is a great idea, but it sounds like a great service. There's a couple other quick things so we can wrap up, because we're getting to about the 30-minute mark, which is where we like to be. And Louise, this has been great. First of all, if I forget, I want to thank you very much as always. Well, not as always, but for this one time. I always thank my sister, of course, and she always thanks me.
I do. Because I enjoy doing this.
We've been having a good time doing this.
Well, you're my favorite brother.
So,
thank you both. I have enjoyed it.
So let's start. There was something that you told me again before we got on air, which I thought was great, and it wasn't anything that I had thought about, but you had mentioned a practice that when you have an employee meeting, that you tell everyone there's something that they cannot do. And can you explain that and why you go ahead and do that?
Well, sure. I do have staff meetings, typically about once a month, and I try to keep them to 20 minutes or less. And because they're 20 minutes or less, I have asked people not to bring their cell phones into the meeting. And one of the reasons is that I had noticed that over the past couple of years, I have one person who would spend most of their time at the meeting not looking at me or not joining into the conversation, but spending that 20 minutes on their cell phone. And then after I would follow up on something that we had said in the meeting with that person, I was told, well, I never heard that before. And again, I don't want to say really in front of them, but my tone probably becomes a little like that, because I just have to say, well, it's something we talked about in the staff meeting, and we made a point of it. And so I guess I'm telling you now twice.
Yeah.
And Thom, you know what? I think that's a topic for a future podcast, sort of distracted working, people using their cell phones at work, or policies where people can't use their cell phones at work. I know we have some clients who don't allow it, but maybe we'll talk about that on a future podcast. What do you think?
That sounds like a great topic. And then we'll close up with just one of my, we didn't really get to talk about it at length, and we don't have to, but one of my amazing pet peeves when it comes to email and communication. And that is the email intended for one person that is sent to everyone. If anyone out there is doing that, please stop. And I will tell you, I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States for 2024. And the only issue I'm going to run on is that if I am elected, I will outlaw that practice, because I just think it's ludicrous.
I will support you on that, Thom. I don't think if anybody enjoys that practice, then I don't understand them. It's not good for employee morale. It probably doesn't even directly address the problem that you're trying to address, because you could do that in a conversation. Or, I mean, these days, if the person is working remotely, you can do it in a Zoom or in a phone call. Yeah. I'm with you there. I will agree to be your vice president on that platform.
And we can. We're in different states. This actually works out. So,
yeah. And we're both old enough, just barely.
My favorite ones are like the real common sense ones. Like, you got the one employee that's late every day, which could be me, because I'm late every day. But anyhow, you know what I'm saying? So then they send out an email that says, just a reminder, you're expected to be to work on time every day. I'm like, is this really an email? But I'm telling you, I've received that email at least 1,000 times in my life. And you know what? If I'm your president, I promise none of you will receive that email again, ever. Louise, will you be our communications director or press secretary or something?
Well, actually, I'm hoping not to be working in 2024, so I would respectfully decline.
We might be able to lure her out of retirement at that point.
Hey, you know what? Retirement is just a fancy word for getting paid to be a consultant, right? Come on, Louise. You go. Yeah, we could just throw you $20,000 to show up for one day and tell us something. You know what I mean? That's the ultimate gig. That's the one we're looking for. All right. Well, fantastic. Louise, thank you so much for being such a fantastic guest. Kathleen, why don't you handle the takeaways, and then we'll wrap this baby up today.
Well, I guess the takeaways that we have from today's episode are: think before you email. Think about your tone. Think about what you're saying. Think about who you're sending it to. Think about whether you really need to send that email to everybody, because if you do, it's not going to make Thom happy. Also, make sure that your employees understand and recognize emails that could be dangerous. The spam, the phishing, the ransomware, anything suspicious. If you want to go and get an outside vendor to help train them, that can only help the situation. But there's a lot of danger out there, and you don't need your employees bringing it into your business.
All right. And Louise, anything we missed?
I don't think so, but thank you.
All right. But the most important thing is, did you have a good time?
I had a great time.
And do you understand why people in Morocco are flocking to this podcast?
Absolutely.
See, all right. Well, again, this is your host, Thom Jennings.
Best guest ever, right?
Best guest ever. We do since, well, come on. My son was a guest. I mean,
Junior was an excellent guest also.
So Louise, as much as I loved having you,
one of the best guests ever. Yeah.
Definitely. But thank you very much, everybody out there, for listening. We do appreciate it, especially our listeners in Morocco, Russia. We prefer listeners in the United States. And, we did forget, what's contact information, Kathleen? And then go ahead. I'll let you do the sign off.
Wow. Well, thanks, Thom. And I want to thank Louise also for stepping in and doing this with us. It's been a lot of fun. My contact information is kjj@wimlaw.com. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you have any comments, suggestions, we'd love to hear them. Any ideas for topics, shoot them our way. Otherwise, be careful out there and cover your assets.